What we're witnessing right now is the chaotic tangle of regulation that results from interventionist policies like the forced energy transition and EV mandate. I don't for a second pretend to understand economics, but from what I can see, whenever you interfere in a market, unintended consequences of that interference will inevitably pop up, which then need to be hammered back down with even more regulation and intervention. It's like playing whack-a-mole. On the one hand, they're forcing us all to buy EVs in preference to regular internal combustion engine cars. But there's not enough mining capacity in the US or Europe to supply the raw materials for the batteries cheaply enough. So EVs made in the US and Europe end up being expensive and out of reach for most people, at least without taxpayer-funded incentives and subsidies, that is. But China, which controls a huge chunk of the minerals required, can punch out EVs very cheaply, and they can see that the West has got itself into a complete mess by mandating EVs that its local manufacturers just cannot produce economically. It makes no sense at all. On the one hand, the West wants cheap EVs to achieve the net zero goals, but just not Chinese cheap EVs, so you have to put a tariff on to stop them. Will this help or hinder the EV transition? I've no idea, my head is spinning. Welcome back to MGUY, British engineer and lawyer, now Sydney-based YouTuber. Be sure to follow me on the usual socials for more content, links in the description, and there's a code on the screen. Scan that with your phone if you want to sign up for a weekly MGUY email. It'd be great to have you on board. I don't even think that this bird's nest of rules and regulations will actually help US automakers anyway. If you stop cheap EVs being imported, then you're left with either buying a locally made but expensive EV, or, more likely, just hanging on to your existing gas car for as long as humanly possible. The New York Times is as confused as everyone else, on the one hand having to toe the Democrat line by praising Biden, but at the same time trying desperately to avoid praising Trump, who first imposed tariffs on China. Biden hits Chinese electric vehicles, chips and other goods with higher tariffs. The president announced increased taxes on Chinese imports in strategic industries, building on former President Donald J. Trump's tariffs. President Biden on Tuesday announced a sharp increase in tariffs on an array of Chinese imports, including electric vehicles, solar cells, semiconductors, and advanced batteries, in an effort to protect strategic American industries from a new wave of competitors that he said were unfairly subsidized by Beijing. The president also officially endorsed maintaining tariffs on more than $300 billion worth of Chinese goods that were put in place by President Donald J. Trump. Mr. Biden criticized those tariffs as taxes on American consumers during the 2020 run for the White House. Well, rank hypocrisy, that's for sure, but there's little alternative when you're driving a forced energy transition against the wishes of the market. In a sign of the newly scrambled politics of trade, Labour leaders, many Democratic lawmakers, some industry groups and even environmentalists praised Mr. Biden's decision, while the Republican National Committee slammed it, complaining that Mr. Biden was not being tough enough on China. I like that phrase, by the way, the newly scrambled politics of trade. I think it's scrambling everyone's mind at this point. Let's see if the Wall Street Journal can make any more sense of the situation. Biden starts a green trade war. He tries to out-Trump Trump to save his electric car dreams. President Biden is trying to create a brave new US green economy, but his political problem is that China wants to supply most of it. Solution? Slap new and severe tariffs on Chinese goods that far surpass Donald Trump's. Welcome to what could be the Sarajevo of the global green trade war. China is flooding global markets with artificially low-priced exports, the White House said Tuesday. Ergo, the US is increasing tariffs on Chinese goods, including electric vehicles 100%, steel and aluminium 25%, lithium-ion batteries 25%, critical minerals 25%, solar cells 50%, semiconductors 50%, port cranes 25%, and medical syringes and needles 50%. The administration is using Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, the same law Mr. Trump invoked, to impose tariffs to cajole Beijing to change its mercantilist behavior. That didn't work as Xi Jinping doubled down on his Made in China 2025 plan to dominate high-tech manufacturing, including EVs, though Americans have paid more for imports. Mr. Biden is nervous, as he should be, that his de facto EV mandate threatens the US car industry. Automakers have cut thousands of jobs to finance the government-forced EV transition. Bloomberg News last week reported that Ford lost more than $100,000 per EV in the first quarter. Mr. Biden has vowed that his green subsidies and mandates will create hundreds of thousands of jobs. But workers aren't seeing them, and Mr. Trump is using the issue to good political effect in Michigan. The way to defeat Beijing economically is by making America more competitive. This means playing to traditional strengths of innovation, low taxes and regulation, and trade alliances. Mr. Biden has done the opposite. His administration has blocked critical mineral mining projects. It has attacked domestic fossil fuel production and petrochemicals, which contributes to pharmaceutical production. In other words, it's a complete mess. The Biden administration doesn't have a clue and is simply acting like a wind vane, turning in whatever direction offers the least resistance. The final paragraph makes the point best. The Biden tariffs are a classic example of how bad industrial policy is compounded by another bad policy in the name of fixing the first mistake. Thus, Mr. Biden wants to use tariffs to raise the price of EVs that he wants everyone to buy. It's bananas. Bananas indeed. This is the whack-a-mole situation in operation. I'd be interested to read your takes on this in the comments, as I don't think anyone has a clear view on this right now. But what we can all be clear on is that the net zero and EV mandates, which fly in the face of strong market forces, are bad for everyone, the auto manufacturers and the long-suffering public in particular.